So our research question, as with your proposals, because this slide deck is a direct copy-paste of the outline into the outline format of Microsoft PowerPoint, research question leads directly into research objectives or study objectives very commonly. So we usually see these two things, one right after the other, in thesis proposal template files and thesis template files, and indeed in longer journal articles and stuff like that. Some journal articles, because of length considerations, will focus on the research question and omit study objectives, which are the ordered steps that you need to accomplish, kind of the sub-goals to answer each research question, to test each hypothesis pair, if you're doing it that way instead of as a research question. Sometimes these get edited out for that purpose, but study objectives are really important for the proposal phase because this is kind of the summary of, the ordered summary of everything that your methods are going to take us through in a little bit more detail. And in your final thesis presentation a year from now, next spring, after you've got all your data and you're analyzing stuff and ready to go and make your mark on the world, you can order your discussion in particular. It's essentially a copy paste of your study objectives, and you're answering the question implied by each study objective. So for this study, those objectives were: gather baseline data on visitor use of the paved Summit Loop Trail, evaluate effectiveness of management approaches to keeping visitors on trail, and so forth and so on. The text specifics don't matter here because I'm reading the text of the slide. And so getting back to the techniques of presentation, of communication in science for study objectives, you want to edit these down typically from sentences to maybe a long phrase. And that phrase is what people can read while you verbally speak the extended actual text of the objective. So this is where the notes section of PowerPoint really helps you. Okay, so this section over here that reads visitor responses to real and hypothetical management actions, that's the notes section. That's text that shows up on your screen, of course, but not on the view that everybody else sees at the other end of the conference table for this meeting. Okay? So put the full text there. Read that text and let people see how would you summarize this first bullet point for more effective science communication for your thesis proposal. Instead of writing, gather baseline data on visitor use of the paved Summit Loop Trail, what's a 3 or 4 word phrase that might capture the same thing and remind you to speak the full text that's written there now? Hint. Usually the first phrase is a good start.
You can condense it to something like data use on the loop trail.
Even shorter than that. That's a great start. Data on visitor use of the loop trail is a good start. But gather baseline data, even easier. Remember, we're going for up to 7 chunks of information on the page. Each one of these sentences reads pretty heavy. This is a lot of text for one slide. I'm going to go so far as to say this is too much text. Okay? If you look at really pretty effective communicators for fairly technical information like this, think about if you've ever watched like an Apple keynote for their Worldwide Developers Conference each year when they introduce the new model of iPhone or their fancy new silicon for laptops or whatever it is. Very commonly, they'll have one word or one phrase per slide because the communication isn't happening through reading. This is not a reading format. So to the extent that we have to have text, okay, we have to have it. But make it absolutely as brief as you can. So something as short as gather baseline data. And then you read while they're reading gather baseline data, visitor responses to both real and hypothetical management actions as a function of gathering baseline data through that visitor use of the paved Summit Loop Trail. Okay? And that's short enough visibly that their brains can track with what they are hearing auditorily. So, too much text here. And this is one of the easy things to catch when you're in the editing phase of your thesis proposal seminar that you're going to have to give to, typically to give to your committee. When you're going through this and you think, oh man, Park kept harping on over and over for like 15 minutes straight about how much text was on this one slide, if you need to, make a series of study objective slides and spend like 15 seconds per slide. The first slide says, gather baseline data. And then the second slide, also titled study objectives, has analyze effectiveness. And this is exactly the same stuff as every other proposal seminar has ever said. Gather data, analyze data, report data, draw conclusions. Yeah, those are the chapters of your thesis eventually. So make each one of those its own slide if even the summary version of each one of these bullet points feels like too much. If gathering baseline data, analyzing effectiveness by statistical data analyses, and then evaluate visitor responses, if that feels like too much text, make one bullet point per slide and just move through them a little bit faster. Okay? And we'll take a look at some ways to do kind of straddle having everything on one slide and breaking things across multiple slides here. All right, so with that, this particular study presentation went out of order. So we've got our research questions, we've got our study objectives, the ordered list of things that we need to do to answer or accomplish those research questions. Now I went back to theoretical basis. Do you see how that's kind of disjointed? Usually this literature review stuff, like theoretical bases, each one of these is a whole cluster of papers. This slide would go before. Somehow it got out of order, but I left it in here as a teachable moment to learn from my fail from 2007. Echoes of the past, screaming caution to you into the future. All right. More commonly, you're going to go from research questions to study objectives right into methods, just like how the thesis proposal template is ordered on our course website. So here, the specifics again don't matter. Here within methods, we're going to start having to get into some slides that are necessarily pretty information dense. So again, you could break this up as, instead of one slide listing a whole bunch of treatments, it's okay if you want to split this out into one slide per treatment, because in a more complex field study like you guys and gals are doing, it makes sense to kind of get through the theoretical basis as fast as you can so that you have more time in that 15 to 20 minutes of your presentation to get into some of the details of this stuff, to explain the ins and outs of this to your committee so that they can say, wait a minute, this setup, this needs a randomized complete block design, a Latin square isn't going to do it, or something like that. They can see when this has a higher level of detail versus something like literature review, any of those considerations. So here's how I did that. This is a very, very complex study design for the field. So these slides are necessarily pretty dense. So here's a photo of one of the treatments that was listed on the previous slide. And these are ordered in the same way that the previous slide ordered them. So information and education science. And we don't read the text of the signs, because reading long chunks of text to people while they are reading them, very unpleasant experience for the audience members. So they can read it for themselves. If they can't read it for themselves, zoom in on this, whatever's necessary, okay? So from your place, about 10 to 15 feet away, which is about the right scale for like room 107 or room 209, where you guys will be presenting these to your committee most likely. Is this text big enough? Is the font of this text legible enough? And it's okay if the answer is no, but what do you think?
think it's fine.
Think it's all right? Okay, cool. Now, imagine that you're like 65 and tired, and you've got presbyopia, which is literally age-related like distortion of the sphere of your eye, making it harder for you to read stuff, right? I turned 40 and all of a sudden I need reading glasses, and it's like, is this how life ends? Okay. So, one really good hard and fast rule for PowerPoint presentations, especially images of text instead of actual rendered text like the title of the slide, but a picture of text, you're shooting for an equivalent of no smaller than 18 points. This is too small for a conference presentation because half the people in the room are wearing thick Coke bottle prescription glasses. Right, we're all a bunch of nerds who've been staring at screens and wrecking our eyesight for our whole lives. So, minimum 18-point fonts. Minimum. For an on-screen, low-resolution projector like this, like a 1024 by 768 4:3 format, like a TV screen aspect ratio projector, 1024 pixels by 768 pixels. If this were a retina display like on your iPhone, that would be 3 by 2 inches. Okay? This is a very, very low resolution display. It's kind of blurry. In fact, when I'm standing up here, I can literally see each of the pixels. Okay? That's not great for legibility. So, you want to use a clearer sans serif font, period, for screens. Okay? This is a sans serif font. There are no little feet or peds on each stem of each letter. Those are really good for improving legibility on printed stuff, which is effectively infinite resolution. Okay? But on a low resolution screen, sans serif fonts are way more readable because there's just less happening visually. Each letter has a clearer, more distinct, more separated shape from the other letters, a sans serif font. So, on screen, 100% go sans serif. They're kind of ugly and boring looking, but that's okay. They are more readable, okay? So, with each of these slides, again, the specifics of this experiment don't matter, but I'm explaining verbally in detail what's going into this treatment. We've got a sitemap, we've got a call to action, we've got descriptive information. I'm narrating all the important visual elements of this, like the placement of this sign relative to the research site and so forth. I'm verbally telling all that stuff. I'm not putting it all on the slide as an image because there's already a ton of visual information here. Same thing goes with the remaining treatments. So we'll just run through these very, very quickly. I'm not going to explain them or whatever, but a picture's worth 1,000 words, so we just go with a title and a picture. Notice that in this presentation, I have broken the rule I've just expressed of sans serif font only for low resolution projection screens. Okay, I want to call that out. And again, narrating or explaining verbally all of the elements that somebody sitting in the audience wouldn't automatically be able to pick up on or understand. And pretty cut and dry slide for study methods here on the numbers. So sample size or sampling effort. This is retrospective, so I know the specific number. You're probably going to have more like a range of numbers, like a power analysis would give you statistically, to help you try to predict how many samples, how many days, how many replications, and so forth, stuff like that. Where you have more than 2 to 3 numbers out of your budget of 5 to 7 things to show on a single slide, where you have more than about 3 numbers, think about a table for more than about 3 numbers. Here I'm right at the edge of that with 2. So I made the choice to just do it as an ordered bulleted list. Okay. skipping through some other stuff, again, methods and so forth. Now we get into the results section. So we've got more than a couple of numbers, so it goes into a table. And this was a direct copy and paste out of the journal article manuscript that this presentation represented. So it copied a whole bunch of really small text. Don't do that. Don't put text smaller than 18 point into the thing. Okay? So this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different visual elements before we get into the fine print. I'm already at double my maximum, more than double my maximum number of things on a single slide. So, cut out the text. If you have any kind of standard notation, like everybody uses one asterisk in results tables to indicate significantly different, or they'll use two asterisks to indicate highly statistically significantly different than control. And then they'll use other things to note other things like the double dagger instead of the asterisk, or numbered footnotes like 1, 2, 3 as a superscript inside the table, right? Where that stuff is standard, just completely forget this. Don't show this. You can say it if you need to, okay? So let me swap the displays so you can see what I'm saying verbally on this slide. I've got 3 paragraphs of verbal text on this key slide here. This is one of the main results of this study, so it goes first. We're not burying the lead. We're not running out of time on this one. We're definitely getting through this, and if I have to rush through or skip a couple of later slides that are smaller, more particular results, not a big deal. We can just skip right through them. You're allowed to do that and call an audible, so to speak, an on-the-fly strategy change as you are presenting. But put the most important stuff first. As obvious as that sounds, it's not unheard of to start with the least important results first, which is generally a mistake. So with your thesis proposal, this is all back burner stuff, right? You're not going to have a lot of results for your thesis proposal, but that's okay. In your anticipated results section, you still want to go with the main show first. And you can talk about some other, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we found this other secondary effect, or I was out at the site the other day, so just put in this quick little note about there's this cool corner to one of the fields that's totally different than the rest of our research site. I wonder what we'll find that's different about that corner of the field. That's kind of an ancillary extra thing. It's not what the experiment is designed around, so put those expected results, slide the secondary expected results after the big show, after this main anticipated or expected result kind of thing. Okay? So this is a very heavy slide. Let's take a look at any other information-dense slides so that we can get a sense of what to do about very dense displays of information and how we can kind of parse these tables out or format them a little bit differently so that it's not, we're not looking at like 20 pages of 20 slides of tables, one after the other. You get the idea? Okay, so nobody's going to remember any of this stuff. It's all going to turn our brains to mush and so forth. So what do we do when you have a lot of expected results, or eventually when you're giving your thesis seminar instead of the thesis proposal seminar? How do you call some better attention to the key stuff? You can do things like the following. See what I've done here? Present it all, and that's too much information. Like, when you present a table of information and it's a whole table of numbers, your brain, my brain, we have to read through every single one of those numbers, loading every one of them into working memory, and then look for what's the biggest number, what's the smallest number, maximum and minimum, what's the range between those two, what is the most common number in this set, the mode, what's the middle, the approximate average of the numbers that I see in this table, what's the median, the middle ordered value out of this list of numbers effectively, okay? What is the asterisk do? Okay, so this is standard formatting. Oh yeah, this means it's probably statistically significant, and so forth. In this case, that asterisk means something different, but usually we're talking about statistical significance. So your brain has to parse all of these things. You've got to load this whole table into working memory, and then think about all of those things. That's a lot for a brain to do, and it's especially a lot for a brain to do when you have like 40 tables like this particular presentation does. It's super overloaded, okay? It's almost comically overloaded for the purposes of demonstrating what not to do, okay? So, again, more than 7 pieces of visual information here, and then graying out most of what is interesting but not critical to this slide. You're taking an editorial stance on, out of this whole list of numbers, here's everything in case you're curious, but here's what I care about as the researcher doing this work. This is the core stuff. Use something like this to call attention to key expected results while still presenting other expected results that are not so mission critical. This is a good way to do that. So graying things out. This is just duplicating the slide and doing some text formatting so that you don't have to trust whatever computer you're running this on, right? We talked about no animated slide transitions, no elements like flying in or crossfading in or dissolving in. That is often choppy and looks really ugly on these low resolution displays, and it's a lot of latency and so forth. You get tripped up. So just duplicate the slide, change the formatting to call out or emphasize certain things and not others. Okay. One other way to deal with huge tables of information, turn it into charts. Okay. Any one of these tables can be wonderfully effective as a simple column chart, as a pie chart to show proportions, as a line chart to show trends, as a stacked line chart to show proportions and trends, and so forth. We get very specific reasons for using specific kinds of graphs, and almost always the goal of the graph is to save every one of your readers that process of reading in a sentence of text, memorizing temporarily 4 numbers associated with each one of these sentences, and then looking for maximum, minimum, range, median value, average value, and so forth. Just doing all the basic univariate statistics kind of mentally so we can start to understand what this table is trying to tell us. And we're doing that in competition with you, the presenter, trying to tell us what this table is representing. A chart, a graph, necessarily obliterates that need to read in a bunch of information. We start looking at pretty colors and proportional sizes or heights of columns and that sort of thing, and it's much, much more intuitive than this. So this is a wall of text. This slide is a trash fire in terms of communicating anything effectively. A chart is not, but it does take a little bit of extra work. With charts, it will typically import from Excel, or if you're making the chart natively in PowerPoint, the text is going to be really small on that chart. It's not going to use anything other than different colors to separate like clustered columns and so forth. And so for anybody who's colorblind and so forth, we need to add some textural or like cross-hatching or any kind of other visual indicator other than color that these different columns are different things. So when you pull a graph across, got to do some formatting on it. Never just leave yourself enough time to copy something over real quickly and call it good and pack the presentation and go. Always edit up to the right font size. Okay, so every part of this slide is a total disaster, very low energy. You hate to see it, but we can learn from this. Sound good? All right. The wrap up for proposal presentations and for sort of final project presentations is typically something like this: an acknowledgement slide and then a question slide and then supplemental slides of anything that you didn't have time to talk about but is nice to have in case you get a question about it. Those supplemental slides go after this one, and you can just navigate forward into them, but you stop the presentation here. So you're trying to, at every point, get to this slide with a couple of minutes to spare. Some people like to split out acknowledgments versus questions. I find that we usually say, and thanks to a whole bunch of people, all right, now any questions? So people don't get enough time to actually read the acknowledgments, which is sad. A lot of people will help you or be helping or contributing to your work along the way. So give credit where it is due to whoever that might be. And thank your folks for being there and listening. And then stop talking after you throw open the floor to questions. And let people ask you questions. Now, one fair answer, like we talked about last week, is, oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure the answer to that. Let me follow up with you after the presentation on that. That's a really good question. I want to make sure that we don't lose that thread. That's a perfectly valid answer for anything that anybody asks that stumps you. Especially early on when you're giving a presentation and you're kind of nervous, maybe you don't enjoy public speaking or something like that, like your adrenaline is high and so forth. And when your pulse is up above about 85 to 100 beats per minute, which is just above normal, about 80 beats per minute is normal for a regular human being, we all undergo what's called a process of limbic hijack. Sort of the low-key version of fight, flight, or freeze response. Higher order thinking, reasoning, ethical pondering and stuff like that, not available to your brain at that time because you're going on adrenaline and angst at that moment instead of, thinking about sometimes difficult or complex questions that somebody tosses you at the end of your presentation. So, if somebody asks you a big question, it is okay to say, let me follow up with you. That is sort of well-recognized code for, oh man, that's a bigger question than we have time to get into right now, but it's an important one. Let me send you an email with a fully reasoned response when I have time to get away from the podium, get out in front of the crowd, or get away from the crowd, and restore higher order thought processes. Get out of that limbic hijack. It happens to everybody, okay? So it is okay for you to say that, always. And most people will recognize that, oh yeah, okay, that is a pretty complex question. Fair. I'll wait to get an email from you or a phone call, or in a conference setting like this presentation was given. You catch somebody after the seminar series, maybe over lunch, and you grab coffee with them. You chat with them for an hour about your thing when you only had 15 minutes to give this presentation, and maybe an hour-long discussion leads to a new research project or a job offer or something like that. That's a very normal thing for follow-up conversations. I was introduced to this job opportunity at SIU after a conference presentation, not this one, the one after it. Somebody came up to me at one of the events at the conference and was like, hey, you're a student at such and such university, right? Let me introduce you to another alum. I think they're hiring right now, and I know you're about to graduate. And went through the interview process and hired on at SIU here with that. So we don't want to underestimate the power and the importance of this questions slide, especially at the tail end of the process where you're victoriously finished your thesis, ready to strut your stuff to the world and so forth. But this slide is also important, of course, for your thesis proposal coming up here in the next several weeks or next couple of months with your committee. Okay. Another answer that is always valid for anybody who is trying to make a statement dressed as a question is to pause for a moment after they've sort of said their piece and ask them, sorry, could you rephrase that question for me? Because sometimes somebody will say, hi, my name is, or you say, thanks for listening to this presentation. This is a really exciting project, and we're doing some good stuff. We're continuing on with fieldwork, but we have some time for questions. And somebody leans back in their chair and they kind of stretch and they go, well, in my day, we did this particular kind of sampling with X, Y, Z, and I remember my old advisor so-and-so, and they go off in this long, sort of winding narrative, and at the end of it, they kind of lose steam and they'll go, okay, so what do you think about that? And they've talked through the entire 5 minutes you allotted for questions or whatever, and kind of used that up helpfully for you. And in a stressful conference environment, sometimes that's a good thing. Nobody else has time to ask a question, and so you're off the hook, right? But every once in a while, the question will get away from the question asker, and they end up going on this big, long polemic about whatever they're pissed off about that day. And they sort of lose sight of the question, or they want to use your presentation to make a point about something else, something political within your funding organization or whatever. It is always okay to ask somebody to, with a long, rambly situation like that, ask them to restate the question. Put them on the spot, because they are either on purpose or inadvertently putting you on the spot. So when they say all this stuff, maybe they start talking about microchips and vaccines and stuff like that, and what they had for breakfast last Thursday and stuff like that. I'm just like, what are you doing? It is okay to very politely and respectfully say, could you just restate that question for me? And usually there's a chuckle around the room because everybody else sees what's going on too, and they're like, oh man, it's crazy old Dr. Park. He's off rambling again. Somehow he got away from his handlers, and now we all got to deal with this. So usually in a conference setting, and often within your committee, it's a fairly sympathetic crowd. Like, nobody's there because they hate you. Occasionally somebody might be in your conference presentation seminar because they have a professional rivalry with your advisor. That is uncommon. It's not likely to happen, but it does happen. It happened to me. And when that happens, it's okay to treat that with gentle and respectful humor, and just kind of remind everybody in the room, especially the disgruntled person, that you are not the object of this person's ire. They're not really upset at you. You're just a grad student. You're here to do some research, get some good stuff done, and present it. So yeah, don't worry too much about that. And if you are at all concerned about that, sometimes some of the smaller regional conferences get a little bit more informal and casual, and stuff like this comes up. Because people feel a little bit more free to be a little bit less professional at a smaller conference. It's ridiculous.
Should we ask our advisors if they have beef with someone?
Yeah. Yeah, no joke. That's a thing. No, seriously. My wife had to transition from one graduate program to another here at SIU because other folks in her old program had serious beef with her advisor. And shit flows downhill, and so they were giving her real grief, like being genuinely obstructionist about equipment, like lab equipment and access to facilities and stuff like that, being just horrible people. And so she had to switch programs, and that cost her a year or two of transition time to move from one program to another, to find the equipment again, to gain access to labs to do the work and all that stuff. This can happen. So absolutely talk with your advisor. Hey, is there anybody, when we go to Midwestern Water Research or Midwestern Ag Hydrology 2024 or whatever, is there anybody we should just sort of low-key be aware of? And if that list is longer than 0, forewarned is forearmed. have your entire research group show up, like pack the audience with friends. This is not a joke. Like pack the audience with people who are sympathetic to you. You can even say, hey, if it feels like things are getting a little bit rowdy in there, can you jump in with question XYZ? Like a real softball, just lob me something, And kind of fill up that 3 minutes of airtime for questions, and then, we move on to the next thing, and you neatly avoid just nonsense like that. Like, it's deeply unprofessional for somebody to do something like that, but it does happen. So I don't want you to be caught unawares. And I do want you to understand that, there are very sensible, normal, responses or preparations to that you would undertake. And, if you have 4, 5, 6 grad students all together going to this conference and you are kind of packing the room together, that's cool. You got your team, you got your squad, and you guys can run like a pack of wolves and dismantle any problems before they show up. Conferences are a ton of fun, and my hope is that you can look forward to them and enjoy them and get a lot of professional benefit out of them while being aware of just nonsense like that. So that's a thing, okay? But mainly, in the actual presentation itself, we've got just a couple of rules, yeah? 30 seconds to 2 minutes per slide. Anything less than about 30 seconds, and unless you're doing it on purpose, like splitting out objectives to 1 bullet point per slide, and you can move pretty fast with those. 10 to 15 seconds each if you want. 1 or 2 sentences verbally. This is a good range. More than about 2 minutes, and you might be stealing from the time that you need for everything else. Why are you talking for 2 minutes straight about one slide? Unless it's a super detailed, important slide. That's fine. Excuse me. Also, like we talked about last week, as a reminder, lower your speech cadence, the number of words per minute that you are speaking. We've all had professors that just talk super fast all the way through, and you're just trying to capture notes, and you're missing a bunch of stuff, so you try to record it, but the AC unit's really loud, and it's just too much to keep up with, and it's double the work to go back and listen to a recording and try and transcribe what you missed. We don't want people in your committee, certainly, to feel like they've missed anything because you are talking so fast. Often, talking very rapidly is a tell or characteristic of somebody who hasn't practiced to the point that you have a clear and firm sense of how much time, 15 minutes, whatever the presentation length really is. And you're trying to speak us through the entire text of your proposal, which is the wrong solution for a presentation. We want the edited down, the summarized, the bullet point level version of that. So if you are speaking in a very high cadence, it looks like you're really nervous. And that begs the question, what is Park nervous about? Like, does he have low confidence in this study? Does he not really know what he's talking about? So we want kind of a slow, stately pace so that you are communicating verbally but non-verbally, not with explicit words, that you're very comfortable with this study. You're very in command of the important moves in this study. What are the important notes to hit on your presentation versus trying to just kitchen sink everything in there and just plow through it uncomfortably. Okay? That inspires confidence. Even if you're not feeling real confident, that's okay. The fact of the matter is, whether or not you feel particularly confident, you know this project inside and out. By the time you get up there to either regurgitate or dance us through your thesis proposal seminar, nobody knows the ins and outs of your project like you do, not even your advisor. Isn't that true? You're the one out there doing the work. You know the specifics, the ins and outs of each sampling site, even more than your advisor typically does. And that's appropriate. So you can be confident in that. Maybe the stats person on your committee, the stats whiz, John Reeves, or Dr. Karan or whomever, maybe they know more about some particular statistical analysis than you do. And that's fine. In your thesis proposal seminar, you're not taking us through the deep mechanics of your statistical analysis. You're just kind of telling us, yeah, I'm going to do a bunch of univariate summary stats and then the bivariate ANOVA tables and chi-square tables and t-tests as appropriate for each set of variables. And then we're going to do some multivariate regression analysis. That was about 2 sentences of text for the entire statistical analysis section of your project. And that's appropriate for a proposal, right? If it's pretty mainline stats, then if we know the label of each of those stats, you don't need to explain all those stats to us. We know what those are. Okay? Cool. I got to stop here. I am 15 seconds over time. But if you have any questions, let's tackle those. And we'll come back to you and wrap up science communication stuff, particularly with focus on the presentation on Thursday. Any questions? Cool. All right. Remember, copy paste. Don't retype any of this stuff. Go from outline in Word to outline in PowerPoint. And in this way, sanity is preserved. In this way, your eyesight is relaxed. In this way, your pulse is low and happy.